So this subject sort of took on a life of its own, and it's been in the back for a while, especially with different individuals reaching out to me and their thoughts on the subjects of and their belief on either Jehovah or Yahweh. I figured, you know what, let's just get something official. Let's just talk about the construction of Yahweh, the construction of Jehovah. Let's just do that because that's very interesting, and to go alongside with that, because you need a little bit more, something relevant that can touch us, because we may not be so inclined to be touched at the process and the growth and the development from Yahweh to Jehovah, as opposed to a more relevant constructed deity, Jesus, from Sarapis. So that's what we're going to do. And it's very interesting, it's very fascinating how the construction of deity from in the religious world and religion is had. Looking at this through Yahweh and Jehovah, looking at how these figures are created, how they are supposed to be seen, where they come from, and how, and then contrasting that with something more relatable. A figure that in our age is the prominent construction, Jesus. And it's, before Sarapis, where it came from. So this is interesting. I find it very interesting. And I find it interesting because of the debate of name, which is something that really guided me into this, is the name of quote unquote God. Yahweh or Jehovah, which is a name that has been in debate, it seems, forever. But the natural debate really shouldn't be about the name, it should actually be about the origin of the derivative. Because the name Yahweh may not be the original name of the God of Israel. And no, I'm not talking about Jehovah as being that name, because Jehovah is an invention from the 1500s. Before Israel met its Yahweh, it was called Yahweh. Yahweh was called something else. We're going to look at the construction here, and we're going to see how things work. The intersection of ancient polytheistic cults and the evolution of monotheistic worship from within the Near East is what contributes to Israel's Yahweh. And that's also something that needs to be remembered, is that this is all the Near East. These are figures invented from the Near East. This isn't North America. This isn't Hawaii. This isn't the islands, Trinidad. This isn't the Far East. This isn't Australia. This is the Near East. And that also needs to be taken into consideration when we're talking about these figures, and for our own personal devotional experience, where we meaning our devotional conversation, would associate our experience to and with. Because this history of Yahweh, it's linked to religious traditions existing in ancient Canaan, from the ancient Canaanites. They inhabited that region, which today is, we could say, Palestine, Lebanon, parts of Syria, Israel. And the pantheon of the Canaanites is what the Israels adapted and assimilated into their own. And at the head of that was El. The head of that pantheon of every one of those denominated folks in the Near East, that was El, chief patron. Now when you get to Yahweh, that name Yahweh, it's associated and can be associated, which we will see, with Yam. associated with Yam. Now, Yam is a god associated to the sea and storms, as well as being a god of death and also a god of the underworld. So that's why, you can see a lot of control of the Israelite deity over the waters, over the sea. But why? Why have those assimilating parts of Yam into the Israelite construction? Well, the answer may rest in the culture and the combating cultures. How the early Israelites may have, when transitioning from their polytheistic upbringing to a monotheistic belief system, adopted and adapted the elements of Canaanite religious tradition, including the worship of Yahweh. Again, including the worship of Yahweh. The Israelites met Yahweh. Yahweh existed before them and with a different name. So when we're talking about the original God here, the original name, we just have to remember how things work. And I'm hoping that we will see that going on, and we don't really have to guess, because Bible actually gives us the answer of how this assignment to the Israelites works. Deuteronomy 32, 7-9. Deuteronomy 32, 7-9. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, he will show thee. Thy elders, they will tell thee. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, he separated the sons of Adam. He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. Now we have to be able to discern terms here, because Bible uses code language. Most High here, El. Most High here is El. This is not literal language. There is no deity existing called El. El is an invented deity. And in poetic language, Bible is letting us know that El gave to the denominations of the Near East their own deity. These are sons of El. El, who has 70 sons. Or should I say, God products from also his wife. Yes, El has a wife. They had children. And to the nations of the Near East were given every deity for them. And then specifically one that the narrative from Genesis to Malachi highlights to a specific people. Deuteronomy highlights as all capital Lord, which all capital Lord is a generic term for chief deity proceeding out of the chief deity El, of which many others have. So the Bible, you have to be careful when you're reading the Bible, because the terms are generic, the terms are general. Never going to be specific. But specifically here, this Lord assigned is Yahweh. And I'm saying is Yahweh in reference to when meeting Yahweh, that's what they called him. Before that, there was another name. Now, concerning the unspokenness of such a name, I'm going to quote here from Dr. Steve Combs. God's name is said to be Jehovah in the King James Version. It is spelled in Hebrew with 4 consonants. Hebrew is written right to left. Spelled Yod, He, Vav, He. In English, YHVH. Some say the V should be W. When the vowel points supplied by the Masoretic scribes are written with this name, it looks like this, transliterated into English as Yehovah. Jehovah. Just going to continue. Still from Dr. Steve Combs. During the Reformation, 1500 to 1700, most Bible teachers believed the proper way to pronounce the name was Yehovah or Jehovah. However, today most Hebrew scholars and some Jewish rabbis insist that Jehovah is not the correct way to pronounce the name. Many of them say it should be pronounced Yahweh. This all begins with a story. Probably the early Israelites actually pronounced the name Yahweh, but by the end of the pre-Christian era, a fear of misusing God's name developed to such a degree that pious Jews avoided speaking the divine name out loud. When it appeared in the Hebrew scriptures, read in the synagogue, they would substitute the word Adon or Adonai, meaning Lord, Master. To this day, Orthodox Jews avoid even spelling God and render it G-D out of reverence. They refer to Yahweh, Y-H-W-H, Yahweh, as the ineffable name, the unutterable name, or the distinctive name. The first step in the transition from Yahweh to Jehovah was the substitution of Adonai for Yahweh when the scripture was read. And I'm highlighting this verse here just to show how things work with the ones that have control over the religious overview. To show how things work. Because there's a lot of questions that I get is, I thought God was Yahweh, or I thought God was Adonai, or I thought God was Jehovah. So there's a whole history of how these things work, and then individuals not within the cult, which is people walking around in the streets, you and I, when we're not so versed in language and context, opinions arise, confusion arises, and beliefs are had. And wherever our beliefs go, or wherever that research leads us, that's that. But the transference of these titles, the transference of these titles is something that I wanted to point out, just so that we can understand where things come from. You've got Jehovah, whose origin during the Reformation is most prominent historically. So this isn't a name that is, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. There was no Jehovah. Simply the modern reading during the Reformation is the creation of such from this term Yahweh. And Yahweh, a term, not even the right, because in context it's simply just like 4 letters. So from the 4 letters you get this, and from previous to those 4 letters there was something else, and from after those 4 letters to then that, after that to Adonai, and after that to that Jehovah, Adonai, these terms being exchanged, interchanged. Just want to just point that out here before we move on. And taking a look at the encyclopedia here, what this has to say on the matter is, Yahweh, the personal name of the El of the Israelites. The Masoretes, Jewish biblical scholars of the Middle Ages, replaced the vowel signs that had appeared above or beneath the consonants of Y, H, W, H with the vowel signs of Adonai or of Elohim. Thus, the artificial name Jehovah, Yeh-O-Ah, came into being. Although Christian scholars after the Renaissance and Reformation periods used the term Jehovah for the 4 YHWH in the 19th and 20th centuries, biblical scholars again began to use the form Yahweh. Thus, this pronunciation of the tetramaton was never really lost. Greek transcriptions also indicate that Yahweh, YHWH, should be pronounced Yahweh. Now, keep in mind, the debate here is a debate concerning the name of, let's just put this into fact or into place here, Near East deity, and to individuals related to Near East deity. Now, this Near East deity was the El of a specific people. Meanwhile, there are other L's of specific people. History just has it that the one El of this one specific people from the Near East is what should be recognized as the deity for all. Now, that for all may not include every single human being because, again, this is location based. If, let's put this into some practical terms here, if I'm the heavyweight champion of a boxing organization, I'm calling myself the champion of the world. Am I the champion of the other boxing denominations out there? There are other boxing organizations that exist on a large scale, on a medium scale, on a low scale. Am I the champion of them all, even though they all have their own main champion? Or am I simply the champion of the organization to which I am fixed? So that's what this is. There is a champion per denomination within the Near East, fixed. And yet somehow the controversy for individuals outside of that fixed champions organization are wanting to believe that that is for them. And that the fixed champion is the fixed champion of all. When in context, if you had to go and speak to the individuals creating this, sure, it may have been a universal idea, but the constriction is to the organization. And the constriction to the organization brings up another thing. Because when you talk about organizations, sports organizations, there's always competition, right? The good thing about sports is competition. It's a competitive market for sports. It's a competitive market for sports organizations. So we can understand this in 2024, right? It is a competitive market for religious organizations. Not just in 2024, the beginning of time. And I'm bringing this point up because when you have to reference Yahweh, there are certain connotations within that name itself that, as I said earlier, go back to another deity called Yam. The competition between deities and the construction of such is one where one has to be marketed better than the other. The comparison between Yahweh and Yam in Canaanite and Israelite religious history is interesting and complex. Both figures, they play a significant role in the pantheon of their cult. And again, cult traditions of the ancient Near East. And their contrast is one that when I was putting together my research, and even not just, just on these things for times, you can't really ignore the comparisons between Yam and Yahweh, which when you're reading the ancient texts of Babylon and then you're seeing what's written in the Bible of their God, there is a religious and a mythological context that the two are, and you can find debates on them being similar or being exact, yet also being different, and I can understand why. Because the Canaanite religion, which religion the Israelite religion emerged out of, that's also something important to remember. The Canaanite religion from which the Israelite religion emerged out of, it featured Yam as a prominent deity. Yam was god of the sea, associated with chaos, power, and fertility. These are all things that the same deity of Israel is famous for. He's often depicted, this is Yam, still on Yam, he's often depicted in mythology as powerful and sometimes malevolent, challenging the authority of other gods and posing a threat to the divine order. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar, where you have an opposing, above all powerful deity going against the authority of the supposed right sect deity? Yahweh, on the other hand, is the central figure of Israelite religious history. The Hebrews portray him as the God of Israel, of course, being one of from their monotheistic inclinations of justice and of covenant relationships. He plays a critical role, this is Yahweh, in the religious identity of these people, and also in the identity of what would become the proto-Christian religion. So when you look at Yam, when you look at Yahweh, their offsprings, you can see the construct of their offsprings meaning offspring deity, offspring religion, but you can also see how they pose a magnet for one another. They're needed. Their parallels and their influences. And in my research, as I've just come across this interesting thing, is Yahweh's supremacy over water. Yahweh's supremacy over water. Yam's association to fertility, and also the strange mindedness of such a character as he's written in their literature. You can find the same sort of unstable mind within the scriptures. I kill and I make alive, it says in Deuteronomy, of their deity speaking, I kill and I make alive. There is none that can save out of my hand. In another sense, I am a jealous God. Have none above me. There are others in existence, sure, but have none of them above me. And then in a sense of the Exodus, of which the parallels from Yahweh and Yam are most there, because you have one Yam representing waters, Yahweh the other conquering waters. All throughout the narrative of the Exodus, the Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, you will always find the conquering of waters by their deity, exhibiting a divine authority over waters. And that linguistic authority is prominent because the names of these two, Yahweh and Yam, when you look at them, they have been studied in conjunction. The similarities between such names, they have a Semitic root, with both having the Y-W within them. And in this history, this Semitic religious history, this Y dash or hyphen W, it resonates with the ideas of being, quote unquote, existence. So when you're seeing Yahweh and Yam, and it's really interesting because in the language there's a trip of there are no consonants or such, and that Y, when translated, is actually an I, because there is no J, right? I'm sure we all, I'm just saying this in simple terms without being, trying not to be complex. There's no J. And in the natural tone, there is a I. There's no Y there. It's the same thing with the name Jesus. There's no original J there. If you look at the different Bibles prior, the 1500s and such, there is an Eosis is what they used to call him, and then his name got changed to Jesus. Originally it was Eosis. I. So when I'm saying this, because when Moses is meeting his deity, and he's saying that the I am sent them, that I, literally, in our current linguistic age, would be translated to a Y. The I am sent you, or the Y-A-M sent you. The I am is the yam, is what I'm trying to say. This play on linguistics and language, when the authors there are constructing the deity assigned and fixed to this people who Moses, this character Moses, brought and gave to them, there is a play on linguistics that the casual observer wouldn't really understand. Because this Yahweh character, this I am, is really a yam. Or is really yam in context. There are, in this now narrative, with the I am or the yam sending, there are two yams now. There is one yam held to the waters, of which the other yam divided so that his people could go through. And in both terms, the linguistics terms, Yahweh, Yam, linguistics play a big part in how we are supposed to acknowledge the origin of these deities. And in a previous video that I did, highlighting some things from the Baal cycle. And in the Baal cycle, of which I highlighted on an episode of Justification, you can see Baal casting Yam into the depths of the sea. Baal casting Yam into the depths of the sea, his home. And then it's called a Baal cycle because it's generational and always repeating that the deity of the sea will always rise up from the sea to war with what is above in the heavens, Baal, seated next to El. This is also an interesting parallel to what is in the book of Isaiah 27 and verse 1. In that day, the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. This illustration being taken, yes, from the Baal cycle, but ultimately the author is understanding the idea between their deity having within him all of the deities of because that's how it goes. They have to assimilate all the powers of the deities around them, especially Yam. You have the Yam conquering the Yam. Or you have the I am conquering the Yam. And again, more power of their deity. Psalms over the water, 77:16. The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee. They were afraid, the depths also were troubled. Psalm 144, 5-7. Bow thy heavens, O Lord, and come down. Touch the mountains, and they shall smoke. Cast forth lightning, and scatter them. Shoot out thine arrows, and destroy them. Send thine hand from above. Rid me, and deliver me out of great waters, from the hand of strange children. Like Baal overthrowing Yam, Yahweh must also overthrow the waters. The thing is, although that's a surface connotation that has to be parallel, because you have to have your deity equating to the same strength of the popular. That has to be the thing. You can't have Yahweh not overpowering the waters and the deity therein. You can't have that, because that's, number one, that's just the narrative of how this goes for all powerful deities. That's what they do. Second of all, you need to be able to show that yours, because this is a competition and a market, is more powerful and worthy to be observed than all of the others in the Near East. You can't just have your deity not having sway over the things that the general populace, that the general public want marketed to them for their deity to overthrow and have power over. Now, looking at the again encyclopedia concerning Yam, he also played an important role in the Baal myths recorded on the tablets uncovered at Ugarit, which say that at the beginning of time, Yam was awarded the divine kingship by El, the chief god of the pantheon. One day, Yam's messengers requested that the gods surrender Baal to be a bond servant to Yam. El finally agreed, but Baal refused to go and instead engaged Yam in battle. After a furious fight in which the craftsman Kothar supplied Baal with 2 special weapons, Yam was finally slain and the kingship given to Baal. According to some scholars, Yam was the same deity as Lotan, Hebrew Leviathan, who was represented as a hydra-like dragon or serpent. So when I bring up and want to highlight the not simply the linguistic comparison to these two characters, Yahweh and Yam, but also the philosophical and the doctrinal, because it's all about assimilating deities into one. It's all about bringing parts of other deities into the one that is your own, and to asserting that dominance, because that's just how this goes. When the prevailing deity prevails, it's supposed to absorb the powers of the ones that it conquered. That's just how this goes. So it's, while the linguistics there, and I'm not saying that Yahweh is Yam, because that's not the case at all. The powers of Yam are within Yahweh and have to be, along with the others that Yahweh conquered, and through the Israelite people, so that a continuing surge of justness for that deity can go on into the eyes of the public to market such a magnificent deity as Yahweh for them to observe. Remember when the folks of Joshua went to observe the land? Joshua said, listen, hey, I got some messengers. You 3, you go, get dressed, go to the land, tell me what it is, come back. And when they went, they ended up getting trapped because there was a thing. Listen, we got spies here, we need to find them. And they were hidden in a particular woman's house. A particular woman hid those messengers in her house. What did the woman say to those messengers concerning their deity and why she wanted to hide them? Well, the woman looked at them and said, listen, they're looking for you and I'm going to protect you because I fear your God. Your God has power over the seas and over the water. We have to really think about, and we won't really because, the context there, but the competition of deities overthrowing water to find one that can do something as was done in that Red Sea, which is a whole other thing of its own, which is a figurative thing, but to hear of one doing something in the sea that is phenomenal, that shows and exercises dominion over the gods already having power over therein. They couldn't do it. And power over the God existing within that sea. It couldn't overcome the deity overthrowing it. They need to be able to have, and when I say the authors of these things, the authors writing of their deity, Yahweh, they need to have their deity exercising dominion over the waters, because that's the thing. Baal did it. Baal did it. So if Baal can do it, ours should too. And Baal is a repeating thing. Baal is a repeating thing. Let's not make ours so repeating. Let's just have it done one time. And on that one time, the emphasis therein to sell it. So you have to have these things placed in, and philosophically, doctrinally, and linguistically. The roots of these Yam and Yahweh, the common linguistic elements adapted and adopted from ancient Canaanite religious context. You have to have an assertive deity over the seas and over the water, because that's the enemy in there. It's a consistent enemy throughout all of the other religious narratives. It has to continue, but ours has to be a little bit different in order for it to be sold as such. So that linguistic element is something that is, of course, as I'm sure you all know, the debate. But the philosophical context is also something that I think isn't really placed into context of that debate, even though it may be. But the philosophical context and the idea behind the marketing scheme, that also has to, place into the Semitic linguistic approach concerning Yahweh again having HWH in it, or HYH, which again, as I previously highlighted, is the root notion for quote unquote being or quote unquote existing, which roots are also in a sense in Yam. Yahweh and Yam, the Y-H, and they exist in the Y-W, they exist in both names. Their root conveying being or existence. So you have two deities that have the same essence within them. You can't escape the same essence from Yahweh and Yam, because they're both in a sense one. But then they are not in a sense one, because they are confined to different domains, and the domain of, you could say, light and darkness, but in reality they're both coming from darkness and darkness. There is no light at all in either one of them, in using light figuratively here or philosophically. And to seal this sort of process briefly, as I've been stating, I want to bring into context here the construction of Sarapis and the construction of Jesus from Sarapis. It's the same sort of asserting, when it comes to Jesus, the same sort of asserting notion of supremacy over everything the previous deity held for marketing dominance. Now, again, just gonna read here. The term Christ, in the sense of Savior, makes its first appearance in history in the Septuagint and the apocryphal books of the Old Testament. It translates the term Messiah and occurs twice in the Psalms of Solomon. St. Paul applies it to Jesus in his epistles, and he too regards the term as a Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah, the Anointed One. Nevertheless, the derivation is doubtful, for the Anointed One would, for what it is in Greek. So I'm just going to read that sentence again. The derivation is doubtful for the Anointed One concerning the term that Paul applies as in the Greek. It's doubtful that the meaning Messiah is actually the connecting link between what that St. Paul is assigning to his character. The Greek word for Messiah is gerund, which means he who is about to be or ought to be anointed. Consequently, it cannot very well mean the Messiah, but only the one who will become the Messiah, which, again, linguistics plays a part here, because you have to understand Hebrew, and then Greek. And then also remember that these things that are Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Matthew to the Revelation being written in Greek, they're written for Gentiles. So that means they're written for not necessarily the thinking group, the thinking denomination. These are concepts that are easy to grasp and easy to run with because they're not as complex as it would be in the Hebrew. Not saying that Greek is not complex, but for the audience for which these things are written for, they have to be made less complex. So when we're hearing the term Jesus Christ, that term Christ as it's applied from Matthew to the Revelation, of which does not exist in context from Genesis to Malachi, it is applied not as someone who is a savior, not as someone who is accredited as being a redeemer, but as someone who is soon to be one, soon to take the place, soon to have the title. They are not that. They are not that. They are soon to be. Now, jumping from that to the emperor and to more on Sarapis, gonna keep reading here. Emperor Hadrian writes in a letter to his consul, "Those who worship Sarapis are Christians, and those who are especially consecrated to Sarapis call themselves the bishops of Christ. The Reverend Robert Taylor believes that the use of the word Christ is a confusion due to the fear of persecution, and that many Christians, to escape martyrdom, profess to be Sarapis worshippers. But the case is the reverse. Not Christians calling themselves Sarapis worshippers, but Serapis worshippers claim to be Christians. The emperor's expression does not admit the interpretation that the name Christian was disowned, and we have only the choice that either there was a confusion of these two religions in the mind of the emperor, or there was actually a class of people in Egypt who worship Serapis under the name of Christ. Serapis is the god of the other world, the life to come. The word is a contradiction of Osiris Apis, and he was worshipped as Lord of the dead. The Serapis cult was a Hellenized form of the ancient Osiris worship introduced by King Ptolemy Soter for the purpose of reconciling his Greek and Egyptian subjects. A monastery was connected with the Serapeum at Memphis, as we know from papyri found on the spot, and Christian monks adopted some features of the habits of these monks of Sarapis. It is certainly not accidental that the institutions of Christian monks originated in Egypt. Christianity as the faith of the church is a belief in Jesus of Nazareth as the Christ, and the life of Jesus as told in the Gospels has exercised a paramount influence upon the formation of the creed. Nevertheless, several of its main ideas were added to from other sources. Christianity is not pure Jesuism. Christianity is the religious life of the pre-Christian ages focused round the idealized figure of Jesus. So now I'm bringing all of this out because this should hit home for us, because we're in the age of this invented character. This is the character that we are familiar with. I'm reading all of this because it is synonymous with what went on in the construction of the YHWH to the Yahweh, or the Yahweh to the YHWH to the Adonai to the Yahweh, back to the Adonai to the Jehovah to the Yahweh. The construction of such is just exactly this. From how you've got the Serapis coming about and the confusion therein of the worshippers, how you've got Christianity in and of itself, its creation later on, being a spawn of some embellished figure, and that embellished figure taking on the title of a formerly embellished figure of Serapis. I just want to continue. Thus, Zeus was the Egyptian Amun, Aphrodite the Egyptian Isis, The cult of the Greco-Egyptian god Sarapis, created by Ptolemy I, or at least strongly promoted by the dynasty, became of great importance for the leadership elite of the kingdom and their identification with it. So, and I'm going to show, going to end with a Bible verse that just seals this, but in history, the creation of deity is not from lay. And when I say lay, people on the street, people sitting in churches, people listening to experts or supposed experts. The creation of deity is always by those that have the civil power to do so, because with the civil power to do so is a marketing scheme. Remember, all of this is for marketing. Deity is for marketing. The creation of deity is for marketing. Marketing purposes. While all are assigned their own individual deity, competition rules the organization in sport. And the creation of such, from this King Ptolemy, it's really safe to say, and again, I will bring out a verse from the scriptures that also have this same format, that this is how it goes. The argument over name, over deity, over construct, over linguistics is an argument constructed by individuals that have the civil power to make that a relevant topic of discussion. This is the invention from imaginations for the purpose of marketing. There's really nothing more or less to it. So let's just continue here reading. When it died, every Apis bull was transformed into the deity Osiris Apis. This deity had already been worshipped under the name Sarapis by the Greeks living in Memphis, the so-called Hellenomemphites of the pre-Hellenistic era. Ptolemy first and his advisory staff probably then subjugated the Osiris Apis to a partial interpretatio Graeca. The specifically Memphite deity was, however, not given the name of any of the known Greek deities such as Zeus, but Osiris Apis received the name Sarapis. Despite the emphasis on the Apis aspect in the name, the Osiris element of the deity in public and private perception of the cult clearly played the leading role. This is important because this is something we should be familiar with. For Egyptians, Sarapis was often nothing other than an interpretatio Graeca of Osiris. Thus, they were able to render the Greek personal name Serapion in the Egyptian form with the son of Osiris. How close Osiris and Sarapis were in the Egyptian imagination can be demonstrated as well by a bilingual dedication. We are familiar with God the Father and the Son, Jesus, right? How is it just possible that the same prominent figure of fertility, of everlasting life, eternal life, and of resurrection, and of overseeing daily living existence as Sarapis was, that same sort of dichotomy within Jesus, same sort of dichotomy within Sarapis, being held, and I want to say this because this is important, being held to the Egyptian conscience of Sarapis doing the same thing in conjunction with his father Osiris. Now, this was the debate in Egypt. The debate in Egypt: is Sarapis really the son of Osiris? Is Sarapis really the son of Osiris? He was created from out of Osiris. He was created from out of the form that the Apis took upon death. Yet for some reason, historically, the Egyptians did not want to accept Sarapis as the son of Osiris. Osiris, God the Father. this should be a controversy that we are familiar with, which was a similar controversy settled at the Council of Nicaea. We should be familiar with all of this. Continuing, the amalgamation, the amalgam of Greek and Egyptian cult forms arising in such a manner are repeated even in the legend of the founding of the cult, handed down to us in greatest detail by Plutarch and Tacitus. They report that Sarapis appeared twice to Ptolemy I in a dream. According to the story, the deity had given the king the task of bringing his statue located in Sinope on the Black Sea to Alexandria. The god was worshipped in Sinope under the name Pluto. I want to just show this again. There is deities arise from deities. Before deity has its name, deity has a name prior. Before deity has its name, deity has a name prior. Whether in the Near East region or in that same central location, go a little bit south into Egypt. That's just how this goes. The king learned that the statue was of Sarapis. After advice, the king learned that the statue was Sarapis upon advice from his associates. One, the Egyptian priest Manetho, and the Athenian Timotheus, who was descended from the priestly caste of the Eumolpidae that conducted the Eleusinian mysteries, whereupon Ptolemy had the statue brought to his new capital city and had a new cult site erected where an ancient Sarapis and Isis sanctuary had stood. The god had therefore already existed. Only his appearance in the form of the statue was new. Ptolemy's support handed down in this manner through the Greek mysteries expert Timotheus and the Egyptian priest Manetho may be considered as a reaction to the efforts of the king to create a cult which united the tradition of the Greek mysteries with the Egyptian cult of the gods. Pointing this out because that's how this goes. Come on now. We gotta wake up to these trends. We really gotta wake up to these trends, because while we're trying to figure out if some deity exists, the trend is already there to let us know that the only deity that existed came from the conscience of a king. The conscience of one having absolute civil authority. The conscience of one having absolute civil authority. While we're looking for the existence of such, and I can understand, and I get it, we live in a realm that is alive. We live in a realm that is guided by frequency, and that vibration is the speech for the intelligence that is. Associating that invisible intelligence to what is deity is the wrong thing to do. While deity doesn't exist, deity has been placed onto what we acknowledge for an invisible existence, and so that's what we have, and that's what the search is for, but we search for absolutely nothing. Pointing this out, beginning from Yahweh and Yam and such to this point of Jesus and Sarapis, so that we can see how the trend works. We should be familiar with these things to understand how the things of the old times, how they went down, because it's no different. And to end here, just to show that it's no different, I want to end showing that everything that I just read of Ptolemy and the construction of that, and of the confusion of the deity of Ptolemy brought in the age of Hadrian, concerning the cult of the Jesus character and the cult of the Sarapis character, that confusion. 2 Kings 16:10-12. 2 Kings 16:10-12. King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saw an altar that was at Damascus. King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest the fashion of the altar and the pattern of it, according to all the workmanship thereof. Urijah the priest built an altar according to all that the king Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Urijah the priest made it against King Ahaz came from Damascus. When the king was come from Damascus, the king saw the altar. The king approached the altar and offered offerings thereon. That's how this goes. From that altar, of course it's not going to be said, but from that altar came a new deity. A new deity placed alongside the already existing deity that was fixed to the temple of that king's region. In that one land, you now had two deities warring. History repeats. And to get into the debates about the names of such, which is to me irrelevant, but educational to dive into, it's really a debate that is fixed to, as it says in the Kings, and as the Kings confirm of what history is telling us, it is all due to the conscience of one on seat of throne, for the purpose of marketing. For the purpose of marketing. The history of old concerning Yahweh and how that generated, that's lost to us. There will never be a sure answer for that. But what we can glean is from what we have now presently also experienced in history. We can know the past from what's been going on. And what's been going on is the construction of deity from one on throne. And the construction of deity from one on throne with associates. And so I wanted to just put this together just to bring out also the linguistics, context, language, meaning, everything that we would, think on when we're thinking of Yahweh and such, but don't. And not in an in-depth way, but in a way to highlight where we ought to be mentally. Because when you see pattern, and especially this is confirmed within the scriptures, the one that is highlighting the deity that it does, Bible doesn't really allow their reader to just say, okay, this is deity, this is it. Bible actually allows their reader to understand the construction. Bible does that because the authors want their readers to understand that there is more to the experience than the staged script of a deity. I'm always saying, to the Bible's mind, deity doesn't exist. To the Bible's mind, deity doesn't exist. And when I say that, I'm saying that at the core of the scriptures. On the surface, deity is marketed. When you get beyond that surface, when you get to the core, when you see what the Bible is actually talking about, especially from the book of Genesis in that garden scene, you will see that deity doesn't actually exist. Bible is actually mocking those that would confirm deity within their life. Because what actually should exist, what is at the core of that philosophy, is understanding pattern to awaken the devotional conversation to the experience it should be having. And so I find this subject absolutely interesting. Been in the back for a while, wanted to put this together, not in any depth or detail, but as showing points of construction of how name goes, how deity goes, how things go, and the confusion therein, to show where our conversation truly and sincerely, where it ought to be in its journey. not fixed on what is the pattern of a conscience of one seated on a throne, or the pattern of a conscience of one located in a specific region of the world, but to, at the core of it, get to the idea and the ideal philosophy for the growth, the development, and the management of the devotional journey and the personal devotional conscience.